friend?
Yes.
Awesome. I will start the 4-second pause then right now. We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto interview series, Dionn Schaffner. She is the Chief Diversity Officer at Aurea Software. Dionn, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. Reimagining the company culture is a great topic right now and something that's very near and dear to my heart. One of the things that I love coming out of this, pandemic and this great resignation is in fact the opportunity to reimagine how things are going to be work. And from a DEI perspective, this enables us to really, have the opportunity to shake some things up and create a more equitable and inclusive environment. Now that things are on the move, this gives us a little more opportunity to make some changes. So great topic, great series. Thank you for launching all of that. And again, yes, my name is Dionn Schaffner. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My background, I grew up as a software developer, actually, a closet developer, don't tell anyone. And then I went and got my MBA and kind of switched to the business side of things, but I've always remained in the tech industry. I love focusing on people, processes, and technologies to create better, faster, equitable, stronger ways to get things done. I'm a checklist girl. I'm a check it off, write it down, make things happen kind of a person. So I really love sort of straddling this space between business and operations and using technology really to support kind of those things. I did a lot of management consulting for a while. I took about 15 years off to be a mom and raise my two amazing sons. And that was really fun. But my kids would describe me as a professional volunteer during those times because I didn't really sit still very well. And so I basically took the things I was doing in my professional life and then did it in the civic arenas and volunteered for various things. And through that process, I ended up becoming an accidental activist where I noticed, there were opportunities that, kids or families weren't being able to participate in some of the things that we were participating in, for a variety of reasons. And so I would set out to sort of make those opportunities available and sort of started realizing all these places where we have these inequities in everything from, participating in a local school activity to sports to, legislation. And really just sort of started getting involved in there. So I kind of slid into the DEI side just from, a living perspective. I was not brought up through the HR channels or anything like that, but really kind of using my tech, my operations side and applying it to activism in this way. And that's kind of how I'm approaching DEI. When I was younger and people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I told them the COO of IBM, and I would be wearing a navy blue suit with a skirt that went just below my knees, hose, and some very sensible pumps, and a severe bun. That was kind of the picture I had in my mind. And then sort of, evolved from there into other things. But I think I really enjoyed the idea of having a lot of moving parts, getting them moving in, really efficient ways to create new and better things. And not a CEO, but a COO. I'm like, I'm the one that's going to make things happen, right? You tell me which direction you want to go and I'm going to make things happen. So
operations gal, you're going to make it happen, execute on things. I can also relate to being a huge checklist person. I feel like it's very gratifying to physically check something off on my kind of written to-do list as well. Fast forward to today, you are the Chief Diversity Officer. And I think a lot of people are reimagining the role of work, the role of an employer in someone's life as well. And I know that one study found that more than 60% of employees say it's really important for their company or organization to share in the caring for not only themselves as individuals, but families and their communities. How does your organization really show up for the full person and the community with kind of the shifts we've seen, especially over the past few years?
Yeah, one of the things I'm really proud about is how we have moved from being agnostic about, what is going on in the employee's life, right, to really understanding the value of diversity and intersectionality, and really celebrating those differences, right? So you hear a lot of well-intentioned statements are like, I don't see color, what their intent is to be like, I don't have a bias one way or another. But in reality, we're like, actually, we need you to see color. We need you to understand that individuals are coming to work with these, suitcases full of experiences that are different from each other, and toolkits that are different from one another, right? And so their approach to how they work, how they interact is going to be different. And if you don't acknowledge that those differences are there, then you can't support them, in those ways. So it's been a really great journey to see, kind of the aha moments of some of our, organization of like, oh, I hadn't really thought about it like that. And so, yeah, now I'm getting it. Okay. And so when I see these things that happen outside of the organization, now I'm having a better understanding of how that might affect how they're showing up to work today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a huge shift in not siloing out who we are inside and outside of work, as in a psychologically safe way, of course, understanding that if the conditions feel like we are able to bring ourselves to work too, and not separating out our lived and learned experiences. I think that everyone has a role to play in diversity, equity, and inclusion inside and outside of work, as well as organizations. And no matter where you kind of sit in the world, what is the unique role of private companies to really create more equity? What space and power that they hold?
Yeah, I think they have the opportunity to create systemic changes, right, within their organizations. Pay equity, pay transparency, reducing biases in the hiring process. I love this shift now to skills-based hiring versus like, where's your degree from? And, because like for me growing up as a Black woman, my mother was like, you have to get a degree at like the highest institution possible. This is what is going to be required just to get your foot in the door, right? That's how you're going to have to break into it. And, so that was always sort of part of my driving factors. I was like, okay, I got to get this, I got to get that, right? And we're seeing nowadays that like, okay, that isn't necessarily the best indicator of how this person is going to perform in this organization, right? What is it we really want this person to be doing? And let's go assess that piece, not, what their school degree says. So, skills-based hiring, even things like identifying gender-based terminology in job descriptions, right? Having diverse interview panels, making sure that inbound process is equitable, reducing biases in evaluation and development processes, right? Let's move away from, well, this person is always in the office, they have a great golf game, and, we love going to smoke cigars with this person. I think they're management material. Great, versus, hey, they've led this team, they've led this project, here's their 360 feedback review. Like, really focusing on those elements, for the evaluation, the development process, because we know along gender lines as well, that has been something that has sort of been an obstacle, for us in progressing throughout the organization. And really just private companies having control over their actions and behaviors within the walls of their organization. Aurea, we are a global organization. So we have folks from many different cultures and beliefs. And, it's challenging for us to make sure that we acknowledge people's diverse positions, as well as create a common set of core and values, right? If you think about, LGBTQ plus groups, right? In some countries, right, that's not even allowed, right? That's not even, it's in fact illegal. So how do you balance those things if you have a world population together and perhaps a worldview that's not the same? And so, how do you create the environment where, like, okay, here at Aurea, we're going to use the pronouns that our individuals have said that they would want to use, period. Whether or not you're on board with, if you believe that or not, irrelevant, but this is how we're going to address each other here in this organization, right? And so balancing those individual beliefs with creating this psychologically safe environment where everybody can bring whoever it is that they are to the table without infringing upon other people.
Absolutely. I think that is a really good example of an organization also setting up non-negotiables as well, and a common framework for folks to engage with and feel comfortable bringing themselves to work. And we know that every person and every organization is at a different part of their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey as well. Where did you begin, and how did you prioritize the many different and big questions that we've been discussing as well, and start in launching Aurea's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy?
Yes. I think the first and most important part is understanding where you are or where we are. What are your diversity metrics? Take the snapshot, who are we right now? Within my organization, when I got there, they were like, oh no, we're very diverse. We've got folks from India, we've got folks from Paris, yeah, I was like, okay, yes, we are geographically diverse, correct. But where are we on all these other dimensions? And it was like, oh, we don't even know. So, really getting a feel for plant the flag of here's where we are. And then also understanding, how are we feeling, doing that sentiment analysis. Do we feel connected and engaged? Do we feel empowered that we're here? Where are we on that? Because you can't sort of determine where you go unless you know where you're starting from. And then also the other big thing I think is important is understanding the appetite for change, because that's going to change your whole approach, right? To where you go from there. If everyone is like, yes, we are on board with DEI, we know we need to do better, we are ready, teach us, or is it like, no, we're good, we're pretty happy with how things are going, we understand we need to have some sort of DEI statement, and we'll do some training once a year and check our box or whatever. So really important in understanding sort of the climate, the climate for change and where you are. So I think that's a really important step one. And then the next thing, being a systems and ops person, right, as I started looking around for systemic changes that we could make, right, that sometimes are it's code level changes that you may not really see in the big picture, but you start to make these changes at the code level. And so they will, grow into bigger and bigger changes, right? And so things like, adding pronouns to our profile fields in our environment. Like I said before, rewriting job descriptions, analyzing interactions like talk time. We have some great tools that we can go back and look at meetings and see who talked when, how much. And you could see oh, well, this guy, he talked all the time, and anytime, Dionn piped in to say something, it was this, and then he jumped in over the top of that, so there's some great tools out there right now that can really give you hard, straight data on, what's happening and what's going on with those behaviors, then you can use those. So looking at those kind of interactions, elevating voices. We have some great, diverse population within our organization, but maybe they're just not being seen or heard. They haven't had those kinds of opportunities to be heard outside of their own team. So how can we get them on other projects or have them write a blog, or how can we elevate those voices that we already have? Even to things like we have a word exchange glossary, right? So we went through and we're no longer using blacklist and whitelist. It's block or allow. We're not using the term grandfather clause. We're going to use legacy. We're not going to use master slave. We're going to use primary, secondary, right? So going in and just really sharpshooting in on some of these things to make these changes that can then provide some of that system level changes that will hopefully, sort of continue to sort of, now that bubbles into their conversational terms and that bubbles into how they write, so using those system level things. And then I think the last thing too is identifying the hubs, those levers to manage change, right? So finding, those mid-level managers who have a lot of people reporting to them, or, these certain, informal leaders where, if you can get them on board and get them changing, they're going to have a bigger impact within the organization. A lot of folks are I have to get the CEO on board, which yes, you do. Don't get me wrong. But to change the balance of the organization, you got to get in the guts of it, right? And really get those levers that are doing those daily touch points with more people to really drive the change there. So identifying where those places are and then jumping in with those folks and getting them on board. I think those are a great way to sort of start. And that's what we've been doing at Aurea.
answering the question, who are we today? Where do we want to be aspirationally? And then taking the steps to do it, assessing the language that you use. Again, having that common vocabulary to use as well, putting pronouns in your email signatures, introductions, I think are really good tangible examples too. And you're right. Having the CEO, having senior leadership and executives on board is really important. But most likely you're not talking to the CEO every day and you are speaking with your manager on a more regular basis. How do you think about really empowering folks across the organization to practice this mindset of equity driven leadership, especially managers? Thinking about, people, managers want to connect with their team, especially if they are they identify differently than their team members, and really want to lead into these conversations as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it begins with, the education piece, like education on awareness of your potential biases. There's a bit of a backlash right now against, unconscious bias training. It's a part of the solution, but it isn't the only thing, right? So you can't just be like, oh, we got trained and we're done, right? But it is a part of it because it helps everyone understand where they may be coming across with that, right? And so, and then holding them accountable to making some of those changes. So, for instance, I was having this conversation. We have a member of our organization who certifies some of our salespeople on their pitches that they're delivering, right? So here's a pitch that you're going to deliver. Here are the main ideas. Did you hit them? How was it? Were you engaging? Were you asking questions? All those. And following some of the educational materials that he'd been reading in our discussions. And I asked him, I said, okay, great. Now that you know this, what are you doing differently? And he said, well, one of the things that I noticed was I used to, discount their grade if they had a very strong accent that wasn't English, that made their English speaking a little more challenging for our customers to hear. Because he's like, I was thinking that we weren't getting the main ideas across clearly. And I was like, okay. He's like, but now I realize that's just part of who they are. We're not going to change it. And I was like, okay, so what can we do to support those folks, right? What tools can we provide? And so we, brainstormed things of, okay, making sure those key ideas and key topics are in text form on the slide somewhere in the deck. Because a lot of times you create it like, look at this great picture and we're just going to talk to it, but maybe those key messages need to be in written form, right? So that they're there. We also started turning on live captioning, right? Because sometimes it's easier to see the word and read it and make that connection a little bit better, right? So I thought it was a great opportunity and an example of here's, an individual characteristic as part of their toolkit. How can we support that to make it better, for that person and for the customer involved? So I was like, yay, we're doing it. I was like, things are happening. So, even just little changes like that can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the detailing of that process of, okay, this is what I learned. And then your question of, okay, what are we going to do about that? And then you recognize, this is something that I am discounting. Like, okay, what are you going to continue to do about that and create that toolkit and understand kind of how to change behaviors as well and change the way that we see things as well, because that education piece kind of fuels that action and just that continuous growth mindset. And I know that a lot of people are continually auditing their practices and their employee experience right now as well. Can you tell me about another kind of example of how you or the team has redesigned a system or improved it to be more equitable, whether it's a process, policy, or initiative to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think a part of it, like we said, we've started using the live captioning to all of our meetings. We recently had a Ask Us Anything, session, and we employed ASL interpreters for the event. And so really just trying to find those, again, those systemic tools that we can sort of add to the process. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, but those are the ones that sort of just come to top of mind right now as really. But I think that piece is helping folks understand that the differences that people are coming to, and then again how to create tools to support those specific differences, and then holding them accountable. To your point, is okay, great. Now what are you going to do about it? But then also giving them the space to to sort of not beat them up over the head about like, oh my gosh, I have this bias and this is what I was doing. Be like, okay, that's great. My favorite quote from Maya Angelou is like, when you know better, do better, right? Instead of like, I can't believe this whole time you've been like, you should go back. And it's like, okay, well, that's where we were, but now we know better. Okay, what are we going to do sort of moving forward? Yeah, moving forward. So really trying to drive people away from wallowing kind of in that, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I have to do DEI training and they're going to tell me all the things I'm doing horribly wrong. It's just going to be this awful, mess. What do I want to do? And so instead of, calling people out, calling people in and being like, okay, that's what's the situation. Here's what we know now. Okay, what are we going to do now moving forward? Let's brainstorm, let's figure it out together and let's move forward.
Absolutely. I want to talk about that kind of doing better part. What does that look like? Oftentimes people are like, how do I know that I personally on an individual level are doing a good job? How do I know that my company is doing a good job? We are spending time really thinking about creating these more intentional systems and processes. Is it that change? Is it asking yourselves those internal questions when you're making your decisions? What is your philosophy around measuring diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and strategies? Also, to your point as well earlier, not wanting to check a box and say, okay, we created the most equity we can in our company, so we're going to stop working on it. But we also know that at companies and a lot of other places that what gets measured gets invested in.
Right. And I think it's important to think about like diversity is who we are, right? And so that's a snapshot at any given moment, right? So you can take that periodically, quarterly, annually, be like, what does our population look like, right? And you can slice and dice that a million ways. And then you can hold yourself, you can put a goal to that of like, okay, we're going to increase this group by this. We want to see more women in leadership roles. So you could put some hard data on that. The interesting thing about inclusion, diversity is who we are. Inclusion is what we do, right? And so how do you track and measure, behaviors and activities? One of the great things about moving to virtual, moving to the metaverse is so many of these interactions are occurring in the digital space, which gives us a ton of data, right? Like I talked about that talk time information that you have. Right. You can tell, who's connecting with who. You can tell how many people are in an email interchange and who's interacting with someone else. And then you can use that data, combine that with sentiment data, like, okay, does this person feel included? Well, these are the kind of interactions that they're having. So yes or no, and so you can start to develop this like, okay, more included folks who feel included have these kind of behaviors. They're connected in these ways. They have, this many contacts that they're constantly talking with, or they're invited on these projects or things like that. We had this great example. There was an email, interchange where we were actually talking about DEI measurement, and it was between me and the CEO and some other C-level guys. And I was like, look, we were talking about it. And I said, this is a great example. Here's an email chain of 6 people, 5 men, 1 Black woman. She spoke up 3 times. 2 other people mentioned her name directly. One was a SVP, one was a CEO, and we ended up with this conclusion. And then if you ask me if I felt really involved in this conversation, yes, I felt super included. And here's why, Right. And so using that data, you can then combine those 2 things of like, how does a person feel with what are the behaviors that are going on? And then you could start to make some things, because we hear that a lot from our customers. Like, how do I know if this initiative is working? They're like, I don't know. We just did this whole thing for Black History Month and, this and that, the other. Did it work? I don't know. And so you could go and look at how many folks, interacted with that content online, how many new discussions were generated. Did, somebody get to participate in a cross-functional program now because they were, highlighted in this moment. If you're like, oh, I didn't realize that she had that skill set. You know what? Why don't you come over here and help us on this other thing, right? So you start to sort of connect those things together. Again, the behaviors. So what are we doing? Being able to look at what we're doing and see if that is moving the needle.
Absolutely. I think that is also a really good example as well, to see this kind of communication blueprint, and also asking you if you feel like you are part of the conversation, if you feel like your voice was heard too, and seeing if there is alignment between the 2 as well, and looking at those behaviors. I think what it comes down to too is people want to feel like they are seen or heard and understood to a level at their organization, from their one-on-one interactions, and also from an employee and company level. For June 2022, I know a lot of companies are celebrating and honoring Pride, which is really great. And I'm sure that you are supporting LGBTQIA plus employees 365 days a year, but always like to ask, how are you kind of honoring and celebrating Pride at Aurea?
Yeah, so I have this inclusion model that's called the 4 E's that we typically follow, just as a way to, because like you said, there's so many things that you can be doing, right? And so this is a way to sort of categorize those things. And the first E is educate. And so for Pride Month, for instance, we generate, educational materials, some resources, what is it? I know I get this question all the time. What do all the letters mean in there? You're like, here's what that means, here's the gender unicorn, here's what's difference between appearance and identity, and all those things. And so providing that educational piece so that allies can understand what are the big issues addressing this particular, group. And so that's the first E, is educate. The second E is empathize. And that is where we give the opportunity for those employees to share their own voices, right? There is no substitute for lived experience. And things just hit different when you hear it from somebody, right? You can read all the research you want, all the day, and you're like, okay, that makes sense in my head. But when you hear about it from a friend, a coworker, a family member, it hits different, right? It really starts to get into your soul. Like, wow, I did not realize that was something you had to experience on the day-to-day basis or whatever, like how that's impacting you. And it sort of grabs you in a different spot. And so when you have the knowledge from the educational piece and the empathize space, that we give our employees the opportunity to sort of share their stories, that really empowers our allies to be like, okay, what is my part in all of this? How can I participate in this? What can I be doing? And that's a 30, that's engage. So that's really like, okay, this is the tactical execution of how do I support? How can I be a better peer? How can I be a better ally? And so providing, resources and opportunities for folks like, here's the Pride rally in our area, or, here's some resources if you want to donate to, or things like that. And there's different ways that you can engage depending on, your level of comfort, the resources that you have available. And so just providing different ways and even opportunities to sort of sit and brainstorm about what that means for you as an individual to engage in this particular way. Because sometimes you just need a conversation of like, girl, I don't know what to do here. I'm like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to march? Do you want to write a check? Do you want to like speak up? Like, you want to wear a shirt? Like, what do you want to do? Yeah. One of my favorite things that I do around Pride here in Austin is I have this awesome shirt that says free mom hugs, and it's got the rainbow heart on it, because we know that there's a lot of our LGBTQ folks who, are disenfranchised from their family or things like that. And I love wearing that and just like, I'm giving hugs. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm going to do. Right. I'm a mom. This is my jam. And so that's how I'm participating, in this way. And so that's the third E, engage. And the fourth E is expect. This is expect to be held accountable. This is the, are we making changes? Have we done what we've set out to do? And to hold each other accountable. So when you see some, microaggressions or somebody not using somebody's pronouns, be like, hey, actually, her pronouns are her, hers. So next time, take them aside. Doesn't have to be some like, or whatever, but, being an active ally and holding not just yourself accountable, but the spheres around you. And so if we can do that, we start to sort of grow the accountability of everybody, right? And we get more and more people involved. So, we follow those 4 E's. So it's educate, empathize, engage, and expect.
I really like that framework. It's very catchy. Also, the 4 E's, and also showing up. I +1 to that point looks different for everybody, and it is all important as well, to really uplift this work and really make sure that people feel seen, that we're uplifting equity in the world in general. Dionn, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or maybe underscoring any key takeaways you hope people bring with them as we close out our time together?
Yes, I would say to the practitioners, listen to all levels of the organization, right? And don't overlook the small systemic wins. You don't have to have a big bat and have this big swing and be like, this is our new thing. So those little things, they add up. Just like you have microaggressions, you have micro wins, and those start to really add up and you can combine over time, right? And this is an endurance sport, right? We didn't get here overnight, heaven knows, and we can't undo it overnight either, right? That's not to say, don't press the envelope or demand, accountability, but changing people takes time. That's a process for everybody. And some people are, are going to move more quickly than others. But it's going to take time. And then also, but changing systems, that can move a lot faster, right? You can make these systemic changes, if you have the right access, that right support, and that can happen more quickly. So, hitting kind of both pieces of that, I think, is what is going to sort of help keep this momentum and keep the movement moving forward into a more, inclusive, diverse, equitable spaces in our companies, in our communities, and in the world.
Incredible. Celebrate those micro wins, really push forward for that systemic change and show up in the way you can and continue moving forward. Dionn, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. This was great.
I definitely did. Thank you so much. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.